Well, hello everyone, Simon Cathro here for the 4th episode of The Cut. We've had some wonderful guests to kick off the season, but today we've got one of our more popular characters in the industry, Stephen Humphries. He's the Chief Investment Officer of Fair Recovery Funds for the Attorney General Department. How are you, Stephen?
I'm very well, thanks, Simon.
Thanks for coming along and being our 4th guest. And look, I think what we usually do in these sessions is just talk a bit about yourself and
Sure.
and where you're from and a bit of background there. So why don't you just give us a bit of background to, I suppose where your working life's been and where it's brought you to where you are today.
I, at uni, probably didn't know what I wanted to do, so I did a double degree in law and commerce, as you do, when you don't know what you want to do. And I came out of it really... I had a strange epiphany in about the 3rd year. I went and did some vacation clerkships, and my first clerkship was with a guy called Lloyd Nash, who was a partner of Clayton Utes in Brisbane.
Yeah.
And he was an insolvency guy. And I just really enjoyed the work. I think at that point I hadn't done a Corporations Act subject, but I just found the work really interesting. And the following year of uni, I did a Corporations Act subject, and basically since then I've been in insolvency.
Yeah.
I wrote a thesis in the last year of uni on this new thing called voluntary administrations. I went and did my articles when I finished law school with Clayton Utes, with Lloyd, and he was probably my earliest mentor in the industry. I worked as a lawyer predominantly in insolvency and litigation for 11 years in a number of different firms, and then took a short career break and ended up at Deloitte, which is where we first met.
Yeah.
And I worked in the insolvency practice at Deloitte as a director, mainly doing what we called at the firm unsecured insolvency, so liquidations and working on voluntary administrations. Part of that role was working on the CleanMade file, which was a really interesting, large liquidation, and I was privileged to do the work with the partners there and a now partner there, Dave Orr, on the criminal trial, which was fascinating. And then I got to a point in life where I thought I might just try to go out on my own and set up my own consulting business. That would have been late 2015, early 2016. And shortly after that, I was contacted by a mutual friend of ours, Margaret Moynihan, who is working for the Commonwealth at the FEG Recovery Program, and she said to me, "I think this would be really up your alley. Why don't you come and do a couple of days a week and see if it works?" And at that time, I was doing work in what is now called the active creditor team of the FEG Recovery Program, but I very quickly found I wasn't really suited to the active creditor work. And I moved to what was then called FEG. It was effectively a litigation fund. And FEG recovery funding is what it is now called. And it is really a traditional litigation fund that supports liquidators where there's a FEG debt outstanding by providing funding for them to run litigation. So I think I worked out the other day, I'm in my 23rd year in the industry, working in insolvency, and the last 5, I'm just about to tick over 5 years in my current role with now the Commonwealth Attorney General, soon we think to be back to being the Department of Employment, working in the FEG Recovery Fund.
Yeah, great. Look, I mean, for me, the thing I know that stands out for me when I work with you and have on a couple of matters like Custom Bus is just your enthusiasm in the industry. Like it lightens up the room when you walk in, because people in our industry see how passionate you are in what you do. The results speak for themselves. Like you look at the FEG funding, the success of the FEG funding, certainly in the last 5 years, and it's been a clear winner. It made a lot of sense. I can only imagine the kind of conversations you needed to have through the machinery of government to get it set up the way it is. But it's a fantastic unit in terms of the way it operates, the way it communicates with practitioners, the way it funds practitioners, the way it gets involved in the actual litigation processes. And I can't sort of, say anything better, because to me, I find that's a very good experience working and dealing with the FEG team.
Look, I guess I'm passionate about it for two reasons. I feel like I've got the best job in insolvency, and I say that, I yell that from the rooftops, and you've heard me say that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like I've got the best job in insolvency, so of course you're going to be passionate. I mean, we both come from a time when insolvency was different. The jobs had property in them, the jobs had cash in them, and the need for funding to run litigation probably wasn't there.
Yeah.
But we look now at what we see when a company goes into liquidation. I don't know what the precise numbers are, but I would say, at my estimation, less than 5% of them have cash in it. Less than 10% of them have an available asset in it. And the community at large, who don't understand the insolvency industry, think that you're going to work for free. I've sat in those shoes, and I guess the second reason that I'm passionate about what I do is I like seeing practitioners have money in their hands to do their job.
Yeah.
I've struggled with the structural anomaly that is, we expect practitioners to work for free. And so being able to do the work that I do in the fund, working with practitioners like yourself, really excites me, because it to me, it is what we see when we're able to fund is we see practitioners at their best, doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. I mean, I'm absolutely not responsible for getting it started. Henry Carr from the Commonwealth started the program, and it's really his brainchild. So he did all the heavy lifting. I came in after all that had been done, and I think to be able to, inside a Commonwealth branch, promote and recruit people from our industry, to get them into government and to get them from industry inside and working with you as practitioners and understanding what you need, it's been the best. That's been one of the best things that I've done. We've really focused on recruiting from industry, promoting the excellent work that insolvency practitioners do, and using the skills that we've got amongst the lawyers and the accountants who work in the recovery funding team to really try to help practitioners get the best results. And that's what excites me.
Yeah. We've got a couple of points you raised there, and I totally agree with you on. And I was having an actual conversation with an auctioneer at a TMA lunch last week, and we talked about the asset, the makeup of the asset pool for a liquidation, and it was obvious in that conversation that the typical business today has less real assets or real property assets or real plant and equipment, those physical elements, than ever before. Because you have businesses. I look at businesses. I was appointed administrator of an IT company. I had no assets, and I sold an asset that was in thin air for several hundred thousands of dollars, simply because the businesses of today are so much more substantially in the cloud or in the ether, and so you don't see those real assets anymore. And one of the difficult things I think you also find too is trying to value or sell something that's not there. The data, cloud. Talking to another practitioner last week, and he was selling a client listing of an app, and what came in on that, and the numbers they're looking at it now, but it's much more difficult to see what's real out there, and that's where I suppose moving into those litigation angles and those avoidable transactions are really important. So. Just moving on from there, just the FEG and the funding. I suppose it'd be interesting to hear what the current position is with FEG in terms of what they see over the next 12 months going forward around policy and their involvement in matters and funding. I
think it's really interesting from this perspective. I was talking to a practitioner about this last week, because we've heard a lot in our industry. Everything's been quiet, and I was asked the question at a forum. Well, you're a funder in the insolvency industry. Have you been quiet? And I said, well, no, respectfully. I said, my busiest month in the whole time I've been in my current role was May 2020. And that was, I think, the third month of lockdowns.
Yeah.
It was the third month. You know, I think the pandemic really hit in about March, and then things really started to get serious that early kind of late April. And part of what I say is I separate the insolvency industry from the litigation funding industry a little bit, because when you think about it, the 2019 liquidations that happened, and that was a normal year.
Yeah.
Absolutely normal year, 700-ish liquidations a month if you look at the ASIC stats. All the preferences in those files still exist. If you haven't done the preference claims yet, they still exist. So the time limits haven't finished running. That means 2016, 2017 and 2018 liquidations, all the time limits on your other voidables, your insolvent trading cases, your negligence cases, they all still exist too.
Yeah.
So I think the next 12 months, and I find the funding cycle in insolvency particularly, we don't, unless it's a really early file, and you and I have talked about, I'd love to be your second phone call. Your first phone call should be to the bank. The second phone call, I would love to be the second phone call.
That's right.
Where you think there are employees, because then we can work in a partnership to try to talk about where you might need funding, where you might need to do an examination. But parking that utopia, the usual place at which we get approached is around 18 months to 2 years into the job. So whilst I absolutely envisage the next 12 months, and I think no one inside the FEG recovery program is seeing anything different, we are going to have an increase in insolvency activity. I was looking at the ASIC stats, and I think they're still unofficial, but I was looking at the stats last week, and January, February, March were still statistically very low compared to previous years. April, there was a big spike.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see May numbers that are around the big spike. Now, they're not back to the normative level of pre-COVID, but I think we're going to get there pretty quick.
Yeah, and I think it was the second half of April, because it was timed with some movement from the ATO.
Yeah.
With the letters, the 50-odd thousand, you hear different numbers. And then suddenly the immediate reaction to that. Yeah. And I remember when, and it was definitely April, because even when those letters did go out, I got 10 phone calls talking to some of the practitioners in the other market. They were saying the same thing. So if we looked at those and were able to break it up on a week-by-week basis, you'd probably find it was the second half of April.
I think you're absolutely right.
I definitely agree that May is going to be a bigger month, and it's good to see, we're from the industry and we're allowed to say these, I suppose, but it's good to see that we're seeing a good spread of the appointments across all the industry players.
Yes.
And you're not, and most of the industry players are optimistic that things are going to get back to normal at a minimum and then pick up. We do have a big catch-up. We've got a big catch-up.
Oh, and I think we do. We have a big catch-up as well, because I think in part we're catching up for the companies that were busted before COVID.
Yeah, but they're still around.
But they're still around.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of commentary around ghost businesses or pirate businesses, whatever it is that we call them. Zombies. I'd love to know who comes up with those names. But the effect is actually really true. If your business was, frankly, crap in 2019 and you held on, you're crap now.
Yeah.
Nothing's changed.
Yeah.
We park construction. Construction is a whole other kettle of fish at the moment, and I think that's going to get worse before it gets better. But if you look at the companies that were ordinary before COVID, they're still ordinary now, and there'll be a rush of them going because the tax office will catch up there. There's still an interesting time cycle there. Directors who continue to put their heads in the ground are going to find themselves getting DPNs. They're going to find themselves having applications to wind up, which probably makes it a little bit too late to do a voluntary administration if they're trying to save the company. But, and I say this a lot to the team that we have within FEG Recovery, if you're thinking that it's tomorrow, it's not tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because the time from the service of a statutory demand or from the commencement of a proceeding to wind up a company by anyone, tax office, doesn't matter, there's still basically a 90 to 120 day cycle after that of getting it in front of a court. It's still a court ordered thing. So I think next 12 months, I think towards the end of this year, we'll see if we're not back to normative levels, we'll be really close, and I think we'll be a little bit higher than what's been a normative level. Construction's a real wild card there, because there's a whole heap of factors there that aren't really anything to do with bad business. I think it's, we couldn't have really foreseen massive increases in prices.
It's almost the perfect storm
for construction.
Because,
absolutely.
Because there seems to be an extraordinary amount of construction going on. You just walk the suburbs of whether it's Queensland or New South Wales or Victoria, and there's construction everywhere.
Can't find a builder.
Can't find staff. They get hammered by massive weather patterns that we haven't seen in years. You've got COVID, people are getting sick, and then you've got supply chain issues and pricing, and then of course interest rates. So you've got this perfect storm, and you can say it applies to other industries, absolutely. But for construction, it just seems to be dominating the economic activity at the moment. Yeah. And it's always been 30-odd% of the economy, if not more. But I feel like it's like 50 at the moment.
Oh, I agree. And it's even the simple things. I was talking to a very good friend of mine who works in construction, and he's an employee. And he said to me, he said, Hump, it's becoming really difficult for me to justify going to work.
Yeah.
He said, because the drive cost me $100. He said, petrol prices at $2.20. He said, I bought a ute. It's diesel.
Yeah.
He said, it's got a 60 litre or a 80 litre tank in it. He said, and if I've got to drive from one side of the city to the other to get to work, then I'm chewing just in petrol $300 a week.
Yeah.
Even those small things for employees of those construction companies is really making it difficult. So I think the construction, I kind of put construction out of that timeline, that end of the year timeline. I think there's a looming storm there that I'm
well, it's already started. Like you've seen, I think it was Pivotal Homes that went in recently, Condev, ProBuild, and then there's a bunch of other ones going in every week that don't get reported like the media reports.
Absolutely.
The subcontractors. There's a lot of nervousness out there with construction and whether the builders, A, can actually complete the project, and B, will they have issues around being able to certainly complete the ones without making huge losses on fixed price contracting. Yes. So I think you're right. I think that's where the activity is going to be certainly in the first, the next 6 months.
And construction's an interesting market from a recovery perspective, because I look at a lot of construction companies. Yeah. I would say the book at Fed Recovery Funding probably is 30% construction companies. It's only going to get bigger, but you look at a liquidation of a construction company versus a liquidation of a business that builds widgets. A construction company liquidation fundamentally is different and probably requires different thinking, because the value is in collecting debt.
Yeah.
The value is in making sure that bank guarantees don't get exercised. The value is potentially in trying to trade on and finish the job. The value is potentially not going to sit in preferences or our more traditional types of lines of recovery, because quite often, particularly with the supply chain issues that we've now got, that's a very short window from things being quite rosy to things being quite black.
Yeah.
So that means that practitioners, when they're appointed to a construction company, and this is certainly only my view, but it's what I see when I look at a construction company from a funding perspective, there's going to be some real nimbleness needed and some real planning around how do we secure the debts that are outstanding to us? How do we make sure that we're doing things in not the third month of the job, but in week one of the job to try to make sure that we get paid? What's the employment position? That whole chestnut of, are they employees or are they subbies?
Yeah.
That's very different in construction versus in, the widget
hospitality
builder.
Or something like that.
Hospitality.
Yeah.
So I think along with it being very different from when is there going to be a storm, it's very different in my view as a funder from what the type of claim that you see and the type of risks that are involved in those claims.
Yeah. Let's change direction for a minute, but coming back to funded litigation matters now, for me, you talk about the second phone call. I think on one of the ones I had in November, you're about the fourth phone call.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So I think I do agree with you. You should be in the top 5 calls when someone gets appointed, because you're there representing a body of creditors that soon becomes you as the creditor when you often pay out those entitlements. But you're also very experienced in insolvency as a department. You have very good suggestions. You just spoke about construction and all the different things to think about, and you can actually contribute to the process. So actually getting in contact with your team makes a lot of sense. You've got the verification of the entitlements, and then eventually at some stage we start talking about funding claims and stuff like that. So, I just wanted to put that statement out there, because I do it a lot. I'm very active. I think you're a department that you work alongside with. You're a department that asks me challenging questions. Not a problem at all. Often those questions help in terms of, steering the investigations and recoveries in the right way. So for me, I think that active communication by an insolvency practitioner is important with FEG.
I think it's vital. I've always said that the communication, no matter what part of FEG that you're dealing with, is important. Whether you're working with front end on getting a payment out, whether you're talking to our active creditor team, whether you're talking to the recovery funding team, communication is absolutely vital. I think more broadly, if you're not communicating with us, then at least communicating with a funder is important. Yeah. And I think sometimes that whole process is really either truncated or it's pushed out because you're thinking about other things. But it's something that you and I have talked about before, is involving a funder early, and let's say involving the Commonwealth as a funder early means you get the strategic benefit of having the funder there early. And it might be a case where, Simon, I think on that one that we talked about, I was the fourth call. I still don't think we know 100% what the FEG debt is yet, but we will. Yep. But you and I have been talking about it semi-regularly and had some strategic conversations. But once we fund it, that shouldn't end. The people who work at FEG Recovery Funding, as I've said, we've picked them all up from industry. Yeah. But once you get into a funding role, your knowledge, in my view, just simply expands, because you're put in positions where you're required to hyperdrive your knowledge. I think I said to someone the other day, I've been doing this now 23 years. I can think of, in the first 18 years before I took this role, I probably was involved in 6, maybe 10 public examinations. In the FEG Recovery Funding team in the last 5 years, we funded, I actually don't know the exact number, but it'd be greater than 50. It might be 100 public examinations. And one of the cornerstones of the team is that we show up. So when you invite us in to talk about strategy on a PE, the person that you're talking to, whether it's me or anyone else in the team, has probably been to 10 or 15 public examinations. Sometimes they might have been to 10 public examinations in the previous 12 months. Yeah. And it's the same with mediation. We, again, and we've been in mediations together where as a funder, we show up. And that also means that we attend a lot of them. And that builds experience, and it builds interesting views around claim type and claim strategy. So if you absolutely, I would say, want someone in the room helping you with the strategy who's in the last 3 months done 10 mediations. Yeah. Because they've seen different things in each of those mediations. So the early communication and forthright communication allied with how can you help me on strategy, I think that is, setting aside putting money in your pocket to go away and run the proceedings, I think that's the best offering that the recovery funding program has, because we have a unique experience and a unique skill set within the team.
Look, and there's no doubt, and I can speak from from personal experience that the more active I reach out to your team, the more benefit I get from the actual from the investigations and the proceedings we're taking. Looking at it from that perspective, if you look at your best case practitioner that communicates the best way, how does that look to FEG in terms of, is it the fourth phone call? I mean, you've attended some of my creditors' meetings before it even went.
Yes, that's true.
That's where we had that one where it was actually line ball whether it was going to go into liquidation or a DOCA, right? And it ended up going to a deed of company arrangement that was heavily. The union was heavily involved in that, and you came along to that second meeting, and it was really helpful because there was a lot of, in fact, most of the actual parties were government, right? And obviously the unions were representing the employees / subcontractors, most of which were overseas, but having everyone in the room and being able to air everyone's viewpoints, I found that very valuable. And not everyone was happy with the outcome, and certainly, we will agree to disagree on stuff from time to time. But the fact that we were able to actively talk with you so early on, and you played, your team got actively involved, it helped with the communications and the report writing.
And I think that is always my biggest tip. Yeah. It's my biggest guide to practitioners in dealing with FEG recovery in either of its forms, in the active creditor form or in the form of funding. Early open communication, early regular communication is really important. And once we've funded a file, I like to be treated just like anyone else.
Yeah.
I like to be billed every month. We like to receive a monthly report.
Yep. If
something urgent happens, then or something that changes the prospects happen, of course we want to know about it. But being really strict on communication timelines and being really strict on information is really important because we're a unique funder in the sense that we don't take a premium in 99% of cases. We sit in the 556 order. So unexpected things happening in the job or unexpected things happening in the litigation will materially affect the return that FEG might get down the track. We've worked on a file where, a number of defendants either went into liquidation or their COVID materially affected their business so badly that the settlement numbers that all of us expected when the matter started very materially changed. It was great. It was great in the sense that you communicated with us. You told us very early, this is materially changed, and we were able to pivot the strategy together.
Yeah.
It wasn't a pivot of the strategy that you then told us about after you pivoted.
Yeah.
The most difficult thing, particularly as a government funder, is that pivot without knowledge.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, I mean, the rest of this podcast could be me just talking about communication, because early communication helps. Early communication means that we can help you with some seed funding to get a public examination going early.
Yeah.
I don't really see the value in a public examination 2 years, 9 months after the file's been open. People have forgotten things. People have moved on. Often there's an illness. And by that point, let's be frank, a lot of the assets are gone anyway.
Yeah.
If you've got the people that you want to examine in the room in the first 3 months or the first 6 months or even the first 12 months, then the memories are sharper, the documents are fresher, there's been less opportunity to do things with the potential asset pool. But that all comes back to the practitioner, you communicating with the FEG recovery team to say, I've got this, what do you think we can do together?
Yeah, and definitely when I look at, certainly the last few years where I've had funding with you, that proactive relationship has just made things work very well. And I can speak from personal experience, certainly the one that you're talking about with us where we did, the recoveries were severely impacted by COVID. getting on the front foot it shouldn't be looked at as being afraid of doing it. Like, you know, and sometimes you get certain practitioners or lawyers being worried about, you know, telling FEG or even, you know, ASIC and ATO that this is what's happened. But, you know, they're humans, we're humans. You know, you've talked about your team having a lot of insolvency experience, and most of those people would have known that in their own personal experience back when they were in practitioner land that you know, that things changed and nothing can be done about it.
And insolvency is a relationship business.
Yeah.
You know, insolvency was a relationship business when you and I started.
Yep.
Decades ago.
Yep.
It's a relationship business
Couple
now.
of decades.
Couple of decades ago. We're similar hairlines.
Yeah, that's true. You got more than me.
But, you know, it's a relationship business. And just because we're a government fund doesn't mean that it's not a relationship business. We're not automatons. We're not robots.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally relationship orientated. That means that the people who work within FEG recovery funding, the lawyers on the file, the liquidator, that's an important relationship on every single file.
Yep.
If we haven't built a relationship, that's when there's going to be problems. And insolvency will be a relationship business when you and I are long not doing it. Because when you think about it, we're dealing with, you know, setting aside the Phoenix promotion industry, we're dealing with probably the second or third worst thing that's going to happen in someone's life. Yeah. They've lost their business.
Well, usually they're happening all at once.
And it's all happening at once.
Yeah,
you know,
divorce and family issues and stuff.
So we're in a people business.
Yeah.
And that should mean, and certainly it's something that I really work very hard to strive with the team that works in FEG recovery funding, is to say we always have to remember that this is a people business and it's a relationship business. What we do, and it's a relationship industry, and building those strong relationships mean that you can have the conversations that you need to have about when things get difficult. It means you can celebrate together when you have the good results. You commiserate together when you have a problematic result, and it means that when the next one comes up, we know how we're going to work together.
Yeah, yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And look, I mean, I'd add to that, and it's a communication business too. It's a very, you know, the more we communicate, the better that people feel like they're being heard. One of the things that I seem to, one of the things we experience as practitioners is that when people are in financial distress, they're highly stressed, right? And so they want things sorted out quickly. So we're having to deal and be confronted with stressed directors, stressed employees, stressed creditors. You know, the government in some ways is probably the one that's the most calm, because when you think about this, everyone there has lost money.
Yes.
And the directors lost money, the employees lost money, the creditors lost money, and that's a very stressful thing. And we're going to see an elevation of that, I reckon, in the next 12 months because of the fact that we're seeing a huge jump in our cost of living. We're seeing all these other elements. You know, you talk about the construction and having the perfect storm of things. In some ways, there's other, you know, the rest of the economy is suffering from a multiple combination of negative issues that are all coming together that we have to deal with. So to me, I think the more you communicate, the more that you have those relationships, the better things can be handled and certainly get resolved quicker.
And I think it's communication across a whole heap of things. You know, we're talking about funding, but it's even those communications when you're struggling. You know, like you know very well my feelings about mental health and things like that. You know, we work in an industry that is full of stress and it's full of mental health concerns. And, you know, I spent the better part of the first decade and a half of my career struggling with undiagnosed mental health issues because I wasn't prepared to talk about it and I wasn't prepared to stick my hand up. And it's a hard thing to do. Yeah. And you know, we're coming up to a point where people are going to be under stress and people are going to be struggling with their mental health. And, you know, being able to communicate about that is just as important as being able to communicate in that litigation funding context.
Well, look, I also think that a lot of insolvency practitioners have high emotional intelligence because they're exposed to this all the time. We get to see the worst certainly it's worst of some people's lives, because like you say, it's one of the worst things that can happen in their life. And it's, percentage wise, I would say a quarter of the people we interact with are having all the bad things happen to them at once. They've got issues with their spouse, they're getting divorced, they've got potential people passing away, they've got the business failing, they're losing their livelihood, they're having to change their lifestyle. So we get to see that firsthand on a regular basis. So with just a final topic, and we talk about strategy in mediations and litigation. You and I have had conversations about this quite often, but the reality is FEG has an extraordinary amount of experience in that area, and getting and where practitioners are getting funded by FEG, or where practitioners may not be getting funded by FEG, but there is a FEG debt. That kind of experience at the table at the right time. Just talk me through some of your thoughts on that, because I do see some real value in and certainly I've seen it firsthand where I've had a view, and then yourself or William or one of your team has said, oh, what about this and this? We saw this on another matter, and it's helped.
I think it's a really interesting point, and it's something that we within our program reflect on a lot. It was one of the things that was the cornerstone 5 years ago in the discussions I had with Henry on what we were going to do in the program and what we were going to do together. It was really around that we are going to be the funder that shows up.
Yeah, we
are going to be the funder that puts two people in the room and is there to help you. And I think one of the things that I really see when I walk into a mediation room very early is most defendants are not really cognizant of their risk profile. They're not really cognizant of what all of the potential outcomes of a piece of litigation are to them. They're only thinking they're going to win. And if they lose, they're probably thinking, well, if I lose, I'll just go bankrupt, without really knowing what going bankrupt means. So I think my first thing around going into mediations is thinking about making sure we're rock solid as a team, funder, liquidator, lawyer, on what our risk profile is. What are our gaps? But being alive early in the piece of a mediation as to what is the knowledge of the other side of their risk profile. And that's the same team. Probably going to have counsel, probably going to have lawyers, and sometimes even the lawyers are not really considering what the risk profile is for their clients. Things don't settle at mediation unless everyone's aware of what their risk is. Now, a lot of the matters that we mediate in insolvency have very strict factual scenarios. If you think about a preference, what the liquidator has to prove a preference is actually moderately simple. There were payments, it was preferential, company was insolvent.
Yeah.
That's a very truncated version, but let's just say that's the truncated version.
Yeah.
You are going to have the same defence elements in every preference. You are going to have a running account. You're going to have a good faith defence. Hopefully, the High Court will do us a favour and not overturn MJ Woodman dealing with set-off. I don't think they will. But you're still going to have people arguing set-off. You're going to have people arguing secured creditor. So as a practitioner and as a funder, we can go in being very, very clear on what our risk profile is. We can look at each of those defences and go, well, then they're probably not. Let's assume they're going to get their running account up. So we know that the face value of our claim is probably going to go down to the running account. If everyone on our side of the table is walking in thinking that, then that leads us down a path to a result that often is a quicker result. If we know what our risk is and we can interpolate where the problems are on the other side of the table, we can really drive that settlement to something that's good for us. And again, us as a global team in running that piece of litigation. I think, it's a communication piece again. I very regularly I get asked by the team when I go to a mediation, when do I tell the liquidator what our number is? And you've had this experience. I don't. I very strictly don't. And that's for no nefarious reason than the fact that until we get to a point where you're on the runway, or you're close to the runway to settle the file, you don't need to know what my number is. The Commonwealth through the FEG Recovery Fund is different to a lot of funders in the sense that I can't force you to settle. I'm there to be consulted, or my team are there to be consulted. Yeah. I'm not there with my foot on the back of your throat saying you must settle, or have a contractual lever that says that you must settle. We require consultation. We've walked in with a number, but that's just a little bit of mediation craft, because the lawyers particularly, and you as a practitioner less so, don't need to know my number until it's an appropriate point. Now that we're back to doing face-to-face mediations, I've had a number recently where we've gotten to a point in the course of the day where the liquidator's looked at me and I've looked at the liquidator, and we've gone, let's go for a chat so that we can just make sure we're on the same page. And it's at that point where we start to reveal numbers and talk about setting aside the conversations we've had around risk profile, where we start to talk about where it might settle.
Yeah.
I think the other thing with mediation for me is the number that we've had within this program settle in the week after, and not forgetting the benefit of leaving offers open and of maintaining the communication in the week, 2 weeks after a mediation.
It's patience and communication.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Right. Gotcha.
I think, and not getting patience and communication, and I, to be honest, my utopic mediation would never involve openings. With the greatest of respect to the lawyers listening and watching the podcast, I think openings are counterproductive, because they're counterproductive other than a very short, limited 60-second opening, because the longer that you sit there, I can pretty much guarantee you from experience, if you spent 30 minutes listening to openings and you started at 10 o'clock, you're not going to get the first offer till midday or after lunch.
Yeah, or you'll fall asleep.
But being patient in a mediation, I think, is important, but being prepared that it's not going to settle on the day, but you've done the legwork to get it to a settlement in the weeks following, and the communication both in the room and beforehand around what is the risk profile, where are the potential holes, and where we might eventually settle is really important.
Yeah. Well, it's just the horse trading. It's getting straight into the horse trading and getting to the thing that what we've turned up for. All right, well, we could talk all day.
Well, we have before.
We've only just sort of scratched the surface, and I feel like I've got 68 questions to go, but it's a 45-minute thing. Look, the final one, which is the most important one, is chicken parmigiana. Now, I didn't know this. I actually didn't know this until Declan told me just before our session, just asking about the parmy. What's the best parmy at the moment? Are you still doing that, or
no? Look, I for everyone listening, 7 years ago, I did a project. I should backtrack a little bit. I'm massively big on you've got to have things outside of work.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have to have things that we do that are outside of work. I'm heavily involved in cricket.
Yep.
I'm the ambassador of a mental health charity. I sit on a couple of charity boards. You've got to have things outside of work. It's so vital to make sure that when you're at work, you're really doing a good job. Anyway, backtrack 7 years ago, and anyone who knows me knows I'm an avid fan of pub food, and I'm particularly an avid fan of chicken parmigianas. And my wife and I had been out to for a pub meal, and it kind of was about 3 Thursdays in a row. We went out for a pub meal, and each time I'd ordered the chicken parmigiana, and she made an offhand comment, because I had written for around cricket and rugby for a couple of sports magazines as a just a side hobby thing. Oh, you haven't written for a while. You could do something on parmigianas. That turned into Brisbane's best parma. So I
made the paper or something.
Yeah, it was on the Brisbane Times website, and the ABC. There's a very, very bad interview of me. William McInnes did afternoons. Holiday afternoons or Christmas afternoons or something, and it was getting right towards the end of Chicken Parma, and I Brisbane's best Parma, and I was like his first guest. One day, and it's cringeworthy 15 minutes of me talking about how I select a good Parma. But the website's still operational. I don't expect anyone
to go.
What's
the website?
BrisbaneBestParma.com.
All right. Well, everyone that wants chicken parmigiana, go to that.
I haven't updated it in 7
Well,
years, you've got to have hobbies, mate, and that was my hobby.
Oh, due to the huge audience that watches my podcast, you'll have 1 million hits or something.
Well, that'd be nice.
But anyway, look, thank you for becoming our fourth guest. And on a serious note, the FEG and your team, they're doing a wonderful job. We as an industry are really thankful for you to be there. I think as a representative for employees, I think it has to be one of the best in the world. I think that the policies and the way the government support employees in insolvency is great, but then the people that actually deliver that is fantastic. So I think keep up doing the good work. For those practitioners and lawyers out there, I think really reaching out to FEG early on, I can tell you firsthand, they're not scary people. They're fantastic to work with and certainly are grateful and helpful during the process. They have a role, we have a role. Usually those roles can work alongside each other on almost every occasion. So, but thank you, Stephen. Thanks for coming into the office, and thank you, viewers. And that's our fourth guest for the cut. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
See you later.